Good evening and welcome back. In just a week from tonight, we'll be sitting by the Seder table, each with our own families, as in the original Seder, when God told the Jewish people, don't leave your homes. There's an epidemic outside, don't leave your homes till the morning. We'll be doing that this original way this year. But that's going to be preceded by getting rid of the chametz. Now that's something that for many of us is already going on. Cleaning out the house from any bits of chametz, of leaven, of bread products, of the year-round actual bread where the dough rises into a leavened form. On Pesach, of course, we only eat matzah where the dough does not get the chance to rise and remains completely flat. 18 minutes after the water contacts the flour, 18 minutes later, the dough begins to ferment and rise, and that is already chametz. Before Pesach, we are getting rid of any trace of the chametz, including selling the chametz that we may still be holding on to, and including carefully checking the home for any bits. And finally, in the morning before the Seder next Wednesday, we'll be burning the bits of chametz that remain. The question is, of course, why? What's the big deal? What's our problem with the chametz? Do we really need to go to such extremes? Many people have a separate kitchen for Passover, and if you don't, you would need to be koshering the existing kitchen. Everything has to be completely separate and different. Foods that are kosher throughout the year suddenly need a new kosher for Passover certification. What's the big deal? Why are we so concerned about every bit of chametz? Is it deadly? Is it poisonous in some kind of way all of a sudden? I mean, we eat it all year. Some of us are getting rid of the carbs. That might be a good idea. But for the rest of us, we're eating the chametz all year. In fact, many of those who are not really on the carbs are eating chametz too in some form or another. Is chametz so deadly that we should not be consuming it at all and be so bent on getting rid of every trace of it to the point that we're burning and destroying and selling whatever we possibly have of that chametz? During the year, we're eating it fine. It's even a mitzvah. On Shabbat, we would have the challah. At other times, to the point that on Shavuos, on the next holiday after Pesach, we're actually required to eat the chametz, and that's because in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, they offered two breads which were actually chametz. They were actually properly baked breads. So we celebrate that on Shavuos, and we actually make a point of consuming chametz. Well, if it's a mitzvah on Shavuos, an actual requirement, and a mitzvah during the year, and totally permissible all year, what happened? When did it become so terrible that all of a sudden we're going to such great lengths to get rid of the chametz? Well, that idea that on Shavuos we actually need the chametz and it's part of the mitzvah, that turns out to be the key here. But let's first understand what's the difference between chametz and matzah to begin with. Matzah is the flour and the water. It's possible to include eggs or other things in your matzah, but that wouldn't be the appropriate matzah for the Seder. The actual Seder matzah, which is the real thing, should be just flour and water and should be the shmura handmade matzah. But ultimately, the core ingredients of matzah are flour and water, which are also the core ingredients of bread. And ultimately, it's the very same thing. The difference is only, of course, that the bread begins to rise, begins to ferment. And it's really a matter of a minute, a matter of a second. Has the dough begun to ferment and turn to chametz or not? But other than that small difference, they're really the same. That one little quirk is where the whole difference lies. That the chametz is where the dough began to rise and sour up into something larger. So these two enemies, as it were, the chametz and the matzah, are actually very closely related to each other. And this is something that we see in the actual Hebrew words. I'm going to try to show that. So chametz, you see here, is three letters, chet, mem, tzaddik. That's the final tzaddik, the same tzaddik, but just as a final letter, so it comes down. But if you look at matzah, matzah is going to be mem, tzaddik, and hey. So really, you have two of the same letters, mem here and mem here, and tzaddik here, which is the equivalent of the final tzaddik here. Even the remaining letter, the ches, where it's different. The chametz is not like the matzah. The ches you have here is not the same as the matzah here, as the hey here. Even that has a really small difference. These two letters are almost identical in shape, with the exception of the gap that the hey has. So we're talking not only in the actual substance of the flour and the water, but even the words here are very similar. So what is really the difference here? Well, that difference lies in that opening of the hay. So there's the matzah for our YouTube viewers, and there is the chametz. So the opening of the hay, where it's different than the ches, that doesn't have that gap, represents something very important. That's an opening to receive. So here's where something can come in, and here's where it would go out. As in the chet, there's only an option for it to go outwards, down, and no option for something to come in. What does that mean? What does that represent? Well, some people have a very easy time telling others what to do, have a very easy to find themselves comfortable with giving and knowing and teaching and sharing what they think, but lack the humility to receive and appreciate and hear and accept from somebody else, which sometimes can be difficult. When I feel that I already know, it's difficult to listen to what the other one has to say. But we need to have that humility where we're open like the hay towards the top to get something in, not only to give out and to tell others what we think, but actually to hear what somebody else might be saying. So the difference between the chametz and the matzah we've now identified. The difference is that the matzah is open to receive. The matzah has that humility, while the chametz has a problem, which we can call ego. The chametz problem, the chametz rises up, or is that chet, which is only willing to give, only willing to be the one speaking, only want to be the one to make the case, and not receive and accept from somebody else. And Chassidus actually teaches us that this three-letter word, ego, is the root and the base of all negativity. Self-centeredness, ego, overinflated sense of self, that's where everything that is negative really comes from. Because all the trouble really starts when we lose sight of godliness. Instead, we only see ourselves and our own being and our own needs and our own desires. So if I sense myself and my reality as the reality and as the center of everything that's going on, well, then myself guides my choices, myself guides my priorities, myself is the only determining factor. And others, by their very being, are encroaching on my sense of self. Where they are, I cannot be. Whatever they do or say or accomplish is a potential conflict with my chance and my space to do, say, and accomplish. But if I'm humble, if I have that humility before God and I understand that the ultimate reality and center of the universe is not me, but the God above me, then a higher idea really guides my choices and my priorities, not that sense of self. And I'm not so preoccupied with my sense of self and getting the most of it that somebody else's achievement might conflict with me or might make me feel uncomfortable. So the root cause of everything that's negative is too much self, too much ego, too much inflated self-perception, too much chametz, too much rising up, swelling into something larger than it should be. And that's where the trouble starts. We're much better off being like the hay of the matzah having the humility before God, appreciating that it's not only me and my sense of self, which is the entire reality. So now we can probably understand what makes Chametz so terrible. If represents the ego, if Chametz is the one rising up, as opposed to matzah, which stays in its humble sense of keeping in its place, well, now we know what the trouble is with Chametz and why we're bent on getting rid of it for Pesach. But of course, the opposite question remains, then how is it okay all year? How is it even a mitzvah sometimes and a requirement? Isn't it so terrible? But a fellow once came to the doctor and he had a liver trouble or some other similar issue. And the doctor gave him medication and a liquid-only diet. Thank God it worked, and after a while he was healed. So the doctor said, you need to eat balanced meals, cut out the liquid-only diet, cut out the medication, you're doing better, maintain your health by eating balanced meals from each of the food categories, and be well and enjoy. But one second, didn't the doctor just say the other day that all of that food would be harmful and destroy his liver and possibly end his life? Now all of a sudden the doctor is telling him, instructing him, requiring him to eat these balanced meals, this full diet. What's going on? But of course we know the trouble with those foods was only for an unhealthy person, while a healthy individual not only can eat the proper variety, but he must. A healthy individual should not be on a liquid-only diet. So what was destructive and possibly poison for somebody in a case with a condition, somebody who's being treated, for somebody who's not well, for that person it was unhealthy and even destructive. But for the healthy person, it's actually a requirement, a necessity to eat all the proper foods. And that's the difference between Pesach, when we completely abolish and get rid of any sense of Chametz, and Shavuos. On Pesach, we need to heal. We need to get better. Why do we need to heal? What's wrong? Because the Jewish people left Egypt almost as morally bankrupt as the Egyptians. We don't like to talk about this. We like to celebrate leaving Egypt. It's a great celebration. But actually, we didn't deserve to leave Egypt. The Jewish people were not very well behaved, and the Egyptians at the time, who were the most morally depraved, had too much influence over those hundreds of years on the Jewish people, and they looked very much similar. There were only very few things that the majority of the Jews were still doing right, which the Medrash enumerates. They didn't actually deserve to be redeemed. God gave us a gift, took us out of Egypt, made us his people free of charge. We didn't deserve that. We shouldn't have gotten that. And that's why the Torah was only given to us 50 days later at Mount Sinai. The Ten Commandments and all the giving of the Torah were really the purpose for which we left Egypt and the journey on which we set ourselves. But that didn't happen right away. That took 50 days till we got to that point, because we had a 50-day therapy process, growing, improving, becoming the people worthy of receiving the Torah. But by the time Shavuot came, we were better. We were healed. By the time Shavuot came, the Jewish people were ready to receive the Torah, and it's time for the healthy diet. So when it's Pesach time, a Passover, at the Exodus from Egypt, we can't have even a shred of chametz. That little bit of ego will destroy us. But once we heal, once we get to stability, and that's what Shavuos represents, then it's time for the healthy diet, where I shouldn't say ego, but some responsible sense of self is important. Pride in who we are, confidence in what we do, assertiveness even when necessary in the face of challenge or whatever it might be. It's important to have a strong and confident sense of self. That is a healthy thing. When someone is unhealthy, when someone's moral compass has been lost and their priorities have been skewed and they've become Egyptian-like, well, then even that bit of self is going to be destructive and feed into the wrong results. But when we do get onto a good footing, when we are healthier, when we are where we should be, these are actually critical tools for life. So Pesach, it turns out, is a time for healing. is a time to recover, is a time to get out of the conditions that plague and trouble us, is a time really as a medicine. Pesach is a time to heal, and matzah is the food of healing, which of course is very apt and very appropriate for where we find ourselves today, with everybody and really our universe needing so desperately in need of healing. But this is not something new designed for this year that we're going to call Passover, the holiday of healing, and matzah, the bread of healing, in order to deal with the coronavirus. Not at all. This is something which is an original part of Pesach. It's in the Zohar, in the original book of Kabbalah, almost 2,000 years old, that matzah is a food of healing. And the example I gave of the patient going to the doctor with the difference between Passover and Shavuos, that's actually an example the Rebbe gives in a talk in 1960. So don't worry. Passover is actually the holiday of healing. It is actually a time for recovery. And matzah is a food that represents healing. And we're really ready for that healing to come upon us. So let's get rid of all the chametz to the extreme. And then we'll be able to recover and be ready to come roaring back with a strong sense of who we are, confidence and esteem in ourselves, and use that properly. And this then is our reminder to sell the chametz. Again, chametz should not be owned after Pesach. Chametz should be, during Pesach. So even the chametz that we hold on to and do not destroy for whatever reason needs to be sold to a non-Jew for the duration of the holiday. And that's not very difficult. There's actually a form that you fill out online, and that appoints an agent to execute the sale for you. The chametz stays in your home, in a closet or in another safe place where you will put it, and the sale reverts back after the holiday. So it's not difficult, but it is important. I'm going to post the link for where the sale can be done. Obshina.com/sell chametz. It's a little awkward spelling. I'm going to post the link onto this video so that everybody can get it. And don't forget to sell the chametz. We will see you tomorrow, 8 o'clock, right here, same Facebook page and same YouTube channel. Have a wonderful evening.